Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Welcome to tonight's lecture organized by the UK Talent Department. As always, we begin all our lectures with a recitation from the Holy Quran. May I call on our brother Barak Ahmed Beg Sahib to give tilawat and the translation.
Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت وإذا الصحف نشرت وإذا السماء كشطت وإذا الجحيم سعرت وإذا الجنة أزلفت علمت نفس ما أحضرت. This was Surah At-Takwir, ayat number 1 till 15, the English translation of these ayats. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, when the sun is wrapped up, and when the stars are obscured, and when the mountains are made to move, and when the she-camels, 10 months pregnant, are abandoned, and when the beasts are gathered together, and when the seas are made to flow forth one into the other, and when people are brought together, and when the girl child buried alive is questioned about, for what crime was she killed, and when books are spread abroad, and when the heaven is laid bare, and when the fire is caused to blaze up, and when the garden is brought nigh, then every soul will know what it has brought forward.
Jazakallah, Brother Beg Sahib. Tonight, we are blessed to welcome to Talim Lectures our brother Atif Rashid Sahib, who is a media person and works within the Zindagi and is serving the Jamaat in the press and media office, and also serves with MTA News. He has vast experience working with the BBC previously and helping train journalists on social media. So we are in the right place to welcome Atif Sahib to give us a lecture on Islam in the media. As always, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So feel free to type your questions into the chats, and we will present these to Atif Sahib the last 10 minutes of the lecture. Please ensure that these are relevant to tonight's lecture, which is on Islam in the media. Jazakallah, Atif Sahib.
Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I really appreciate you being invited to speak about this topic, which is really important for us as Ahmadi Muslims, because it's our duty to portray the true and peaceful teachings of Islam to the whole world. And the media and the media landscape is one of the most suitable ways to do that in this day and age. And in terms of that, I've prepared a presentation which I'm going to go through, and I'm going to show how how vast the media landscape is and what the potential is, and also how Islam is portrayed in the media these days and for many, many years in the last few decades, and why that is. Because I know a lot of you watching might be thinking that, you know, there's a whole agenda and there's a lot of Islamophobia and editors are out to get Muslims. And that may be the case in some places, but it might not be so clear cut as that as well, because there are other reasons as well why there might be negative stories in the media. But you know, this whole topic is so important because there have been studies done in the last few years which show that about 35% of school children in the UK actually believe that Muslims are taking over the country, and they have been shown to have really negative views of Muslims and also of immigrants in general. And another study showed that a third of Britons think that Islam promotes violence and it's not compatible with democracy or Western values. So, you know, if you think about where these kind of perceptions come from, they come from a lot of it from what they see in the media, right? Because that's what influences your perceptions of others and the world and your worldview. So I'm going to go through, you know, how society is being conditioned almost to fear Islam, and also how words have that kind of impact, so much so that, you know, people are inspired or radicalized, I should say, by words to even kill people or to do acts of violence. And then I'll go through how we as Ahmadi Muslims especially can counter that, and why it's our duty to do so. In the next slide, so basically, you know, if you think about the age that we're living in today, and in the verses that were cited at the beginning, which was of Surah At-Takwir, there's certain prophecies, and that is when the books are widely published and spread abroad. So this is talking about this current era that we're living in, that a time will come when there will be mass media and communications, and the printing press was one fulfillment of that. You know, where there's literature produced and printed and spread on a mass scale, you know, all this spread of information and ideas, and which has now been even more sped up with mobile phones and modern transport systems. And, you know, you have WhatsApp, you have YouTube, you have live streaming, you have FaceTime, you can meet people from all around the world just sitting, you know, at your desk or in your bedroom, in your home. And this was necessary to happen in this day and age, because this was the time when the message of Islam was destined to be spread all over the world. And this is the means for it to happen, right? So now the whole world is like a global village, and the media is the tool and the means for which, through which information and ideas is spread through the entire world. And there's another prophecy as well in the Holy Quran, that they will try to extinguish the light of Allah with their mouths. The light of Allah, what does that mean? That means the Holy Quran, that means Islam, that means the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And it says with their mouths. Now, if you think about it, at the beginning of Islam, at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Islam was being attacked by the sword, right? Muslims were being killed, and there was efforts to try to eradicate Islam through force, through physical means. But today, what we see is that it's happening through words. It's happening through books and publications, and through the pen, and through these banners and protests and things like that. And there's a whole, you know, propaganda almost against Islam. And this is the means through which, you know, the light of Allah is trying to be extinguished. And there's another prophecy as well where Hazrat Khalifa Dhul Masih Sani Razlan actually said that, you know, that one, and this was when the loudspeaker was first introduced in Qadian, he actually said that one day, a day will come that the Khalifa will be sitting in one place delivering a dars, and people all around the world will be listening. And we can see this, you can see how this has been fulfilled in our time with MTA, and even more, you know, with our phones and YouTube and all these other means through which we can hear Hazur's voice. So this is just to give you a bit of background and context to the rest of the talk, that this is a really, really special time which has been prophesied in the Holy Quran. And just as there's been, you know, this warning or, you know, this prophecy that some people will try to extinguish the light of Allah. The prophecy carries on. It says, but Allah will perfect his light. And it also says that, he it is who has sent the messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth to make it prevail over all other religions. Now, a lot of commentators, take this to mean that this verse refers to the time of the promised Messiah, Islam, right? Because that's the era when Islam was to spread all over the world. And also this is the era when all these different ideologies and religions will come to the forefront, and Islam will then be able to be shown to be superior, a superior teaching to all of those. And the Prophet Islam similarly has said that this is not the time for the sword to fight physically, to fight battles. He said that think of the preparations that the opponents of Islam are now making. They're not lining up armies, but they're publishing magazines and books. And he said, we also should therefore pick up our pen and answer their attacks with magazines and books. He said, it is not expedient that the prescription and the sickness should be at a variance. If the treatment does not conform with the sickness, the consequence is bound to be unprofitable and harmful. So Hazrat Masih Maud Islam, has said that this is the age where Islam is being attacked with the pen and with books, and in the last couple of decades, even more so through on TV, through talk shows, and through YouTube videos and debates and things like that, on digital platforms. And a lot of Muslims, when they see the Holy Prophet ﷺ being mocked or denigrated and Islam being ridiculed, they respond with violence. I wouldn't say, sorry, I don't mean a lot, but I mean there are elements who do that, right? They get very angry, violent, and they respond with violence. But the Prophet ﷺ has taught us that that is not the way to respond, right? You don't respond to words. If someone says something offensive to you, you don't go punch them in the face, right? You respond with the same means that they are using. So if they're using words, you should respond with better words, and you should refute them. And just like these days, they're responding through books, TVs, videos, and in their writings. The only rational way to respond to that is in the same way, through books, through talks, through lectures, and through rational means. And there are other prophecies where Hazrat Masih Maud Islam received the revelation that I shall cause thy message to reach the corners of the earth, and it's happening through digital media today. So the era we're living in today has loads of different kinds of media, right? It's not just books and magazines anymore. Today we have the internet, we have television, we have radio, we have newspapers, and then we have social media, right? Which is really, really big these days. And there's a big trend towards social media, especially within the younger generations, right? A lot of young people are tuning away from TV and radio. Now it's all about on-demand content, right? No one's, young people especially, they're not they're not sitting down like 6 p.m. to watch something, because everything is available, on demand on your phone whenever you want it. And I don't know, some of you might not know that yellow one, but that's Snapchat, which is quite popular as well. And there's TikTok as well, there's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and of course YouTube as well. But in terms of the different media, they all have certain levels of regulation as well. So Ofcom is the regulator for broadcast media. So if anything which is harmful or inaccurate, or which goes against certain guidelines, if someone complains to Ofcom, then Ofcom has the power to sanction them. They can fine them, they can give them a warning, they can even take them off air. And this has actually happened quite a few times actually, because some channels in the UK, they've said they made quite dangerous comments against Ahmadis, calling for Ahmadis to be killed, and the Ahmadis are non-Muslims and they're apostates and they're wajib al-qatl, which means they're liable to be killed. And they were sanctioned, and I believe they were fined as well. But Ofcom is the regulator for TV and broadcast media in the UK, and then IPSO is the regulator for newspapers. But IPSO has been criticized quite a lot because it doesn't do a good enough job, because it's very much it's newspapers very much almost are self-regulated, right? Because the newspapers basically created IPSO themselves, and it's faced a lot of criticism because it doesn't regulate newspapers enough. And we'll see how that manifests later on in the slides, when you see these really inflammatory headlines against Muslims and immigrants and things like that. And then and IPSO does have, although it does have guidelines which are very reasonable. For example, you have to be fair, accurate, you have to protect people's privacy. There's guidelines against harassment or promoting hatred or discrimination. So it does have those, but it's not enforced as well as it should be. But interestingly enough, there's not an actual regulator for social media, right? They're also self-regulated, and if you see some hate-filled messages or some incitement to violence, which are not allowed on their platforms by their own guidelines, then they're expected to take those down themselves or ban the person who's doing that. But that's a big controversy right now, how social media and big tech is regulated or should be regulated. Now, we're going to play a little game for those who are watching. I'm going to bring up some headlines, and you're going to guess whether these headlines are fake or they actually appeared in a newspaper and they're actually real or not. So let's go with the first one. Muslim plot to kill Pope. Do you think that's real or not? It looks really ludicrous, but it's in fact a real headline, which was published, I believe, in 2015 in the Daily Express. And the story, it turns out, it was just the Pope was visiting the UK, and there was a bunch of street cleaners or something, and they were arrested on suspicion, but it didn't really lead to anything. But this was like a front page story, and the way they phrased it, Muslim plot to kill Pope. Islam is a cancer. That is also real, and that was tweeted by Rupert Murdoch, no less, who's one of the biggest media moguls in the world, and he owns a lot of big media companies. So if he's saying things like this, then it's no surprise if some of those media outlets are also doing similar or saying similar things, or giving that kind of things like that coverage. Islam is of the devil. That's also something which was published. It's actually a book by the American pastor Terry Jones, and this is a pastor who was I think he threatened to burn the Quran as well. This one, hijabis look like letterboxes, bank robbers. I'm sure all of you in the UK know quite well. That was the Prime Minister himself who said this. And now, of course, they will defend, whatever they say, however they will. But the impact is there. Even a lot of the times after some of this is published, there's a spike in Islamophobia and also anti-Islamic hate crime. We need more Islamophobia. This, if you can believe it, was also actually published. So this is just a snapshot of how bad the situation is, how prevalent it is in the media. And it's not like, it's every single day, and it's not like it's, wall to wall, but this just shows that it's there. But as we'll see, I mean, there are good stories as well, which the media shows about Muslims. It's not all bad, and the media isn't all terrible, because we've got good coverage in the past, and a lot of big outlets have interviewed Ahmadi Muslims, have given some positive coverage, and also interviewed Hazur himself. But this is just to show that this kind of stuff exists, And what this shows is that, number one, the people who are saying this stuff, this is actually probably what they believe as well. And this is the kind of views that they hold. And secondly, if this is what the media are saying, then it's very, very likely that this is what, and this is why people are thinking what they're thinking. Like in the beginning, I mentioned that there's been studies which show that, a third of Britons don't believe that Islam is compatible with the West, or that it preaches violence. This might be a clue as to why they might think that. So that's the impact of that. So we're just going to watch a quick video about the impact of words, and how much the media has or how badly it treats Muslims, or how negatively it gives coverage of Muslims. So let's just watch that. It's about a minute or so long.
These days, Islam sells. So it's no surprise that newspapers are cashing in. But you might be shocked to know just how much they are. After a year-long study by One Path Network on 5 of Australia's biggest newspapers, we found almost 3,000 articles that referred to Islam or Muslims, alongside words like violence, extremism, terrorism, or radical. And that's just in 2017. We're talking more than 8 articles a day portraying Islam and Muslims negatively. Of those 3,000 articles, there were 152 front pages about Muslims. That's almost every second day. The Australian public really is being bombarded with negative coverage of Islam. Now, there's no doubt that we do need to talk about terrorism and violence, but we have to ask, were there really enough newsworthy stories to warrant a full 2-page newspaper spread talking about the perils and dangers of Islam every single day? Because that's exactly what's happening right now. It's easy to see these figures as just numbers with no real effect on the Muslim community. But in 2016, an Essential Report poll found that 49% of Australians support a ban on Muslim immigration. This year, a report by the Islamophobia Register of Australia directly linked spikes in hate crimes against Muslims with negative media coverage of the Muslim community. But this is the crazy thing. Another study in 2016 by researchers at Griffith University found that nearly 70% of Australians admitted that they knew little to nothing about Islam and Muslims. This is the real cost of our current media discourse around Islam in Australia. We know nothing about Muslims, but we hate them anyway.
Right. So hopefully that shows you, the impact of words, the impact of the media, and how much of a real life impact that has in terms of policies, in terms of people's actions and their perceptions. And just take a look at this next slide. This is a snapshot of loads of different articles and headlines and newspapers, and they're all real, and these are all headlines which are actually published. A lot of them were retracted, or the newspaper had to issue an apology and a correction as well. So, for example, this one at the bottom, Ramazan train driver in crash. Basically, the son alleged that because he was fasting in Ramadan, that's why he crashed. But after complaints, the regulator upheld those complaints, and they said that they provided no evidence. They just asserted that themselves, right? And there was no evidence that it was because he was fasting or because it was Ramadan that he crashed, right? So they had to apologize for that. And in fact, they removed the article from their website, and they issued a correction. And then the one in the bottom right, the 1 in 5 British Muslims have sympathy for jihadis. That also was quite a big case. IPSO received 3,000 complaints, and they ruled that the headline was pretty misleading because in the poll that they did, in the survey that they didn't actually mention jihadis or ISIS, and it was just a misleading headline. And then they published an acknowledgement, but that was on page 5. So the impact is already there, right? People are going to see the front page, and they're going to think that, okay, look, a lot of Muslims in the UK have sympathy for jihadis, but that is not true at all. And they acknowledge that it's not true, but they acknowledged it on page 5, which God knows if anyone's going to read that, but the damage is already done. And if you look at all these other ones, they're really ludicrous, some of them, and they're really they're almost mocking Muslims as well, like Ramazan and Ding Tong, and BBC puts Muslims before you, and Britain goes halal, and some of them are just completely ludicrous, right? But it's mainly tabloids, and they get away with it as well a lot of time, because if they do get a fine, then that's something that they can afford, and they feel that it's worth it, right, to get the hits and the coverage. And also in the bottom left, another thing is this was actually adverts in the US, and it was American Freedom Defense Initiative. And basically there was somebody did an investigation to show that there's certain groups, organizations which are spending a lot of money just to promote Islamophobia, just to do adverts like this, and to write books and other publications disparaging Islam and Muslims, right? So it's not just the media, it's other organizations as well whose entire agenda is just to spread Islamophobia. Now, why is there so much Islamophobia, in the media or in society? Having worked in the media myself, I'd say that, look, it's not like every editor has an agenda, or every editor is Islamophobic, or and it's different with tabloids to broadcast media and other media organizations, that you can't paint the whole media landscape with the same brush, right? There's elements which might have an agenda, but there's others who try to be fair and truthful and just. But what I've seen is mainly it's just ignorance. It's mainly because, look, they don't know, the truth about Islam. They might not even have met a Muslim, and also, violent actions by Muslims, abroad or wherever, that might shape their perception. And also it's just a reflection of society. If society thinks one way, then the media is going to reflect that as well. And if the media is pushing a certain narrative, then obviously society is going to believe that as well. But most of the time it is just that they don't know what Islam's true teachings are. And why would they? How can you expect them to know, unless we reach out to them and they find out themselves or somehow. So that unconscious bias does exist, but usually it's because they don't know, and they just have to report on what Muslims are doing. And when Muslims are doing bad things, then it makes for a good news story as well. But having said that, in the last few years, there have been efforts to try to balance it a bit, and society generally is changing as well, and journalists and editors, they realize that they have to, I suppose, be a bit more responsible as well, and so there have been stories about Muslims doing charitable work and things like that. But also there is an anti-Islam industry, like I mentioned. There are people who are spending a lot of money trying to make Islam and Muslims look bad. And just in society in general, there's like the far right who feel that Islam is a threat to the Western values and way of life. But this definition is what a group of MPs in the UK said is Islamophobia, basically, and they said it's a form of racism. But also, like, Islamophobia is not something new. It's something that existed, right, since the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? The Muslims in those days, had a lot of propaganda against them. The Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had a lot of propaganda against him, and the way they responded is the way we should respond, and that was just generally through patience and prayer, and through preaching, and through good words. And we'll go into that a bit more in a minute as well. And just some more anti-Islamic beliefs that people hold, right, which will seem completely alien to you, whoever's watching this, right? It'll seem like, you probably never even heard of some of this. Like, some believe that there are Sharia no-go zones, I should say no-go zones. Basically, there's areas in the UK where it's just like a mini Muslim state, and that only Muslims are allowed there, and they're basically running their own affairs and things. Yes, there might be areas where there's more Muslims than not, but this basically alleges that they've got their own rules and their own law and everything. Then Islam is incompatible with the West. Most Muslims support terrorism. Islam oppresses women. And also, like, there was 1,000% rise in hate attacks in the UK after the Christchurch attacks, when a person attacked a mosque there and streamed it live on Facebook. That led to increased Islamophobia in the UK. And just this video just shows that this person was a member of a far right extremist party, and he then, well, you can hear his story for yourself. But he thought all Muslims were, really bad, and he had this negative perception. But you can hear his story and see what, the lessons that, we can draw from his story, which is basically that he just didn't know, and he had just heard things from here and there, and that's what formed his perception.
I thought Muslims wanted to take over. They didn't like us. Islam was going to take us back to the Dark Ages, beating their wives. They wanted to introduce this Sharia law. It's like a battleground. You've got to be prepared to fight back. You do anything to protect your identity. I was shopping in Norwich with my children. I noticed a few Muslim women. They went into a room full of Muslims, all in their traditional clothing. As I was about to walk away, something just possessed me. It's like it took my hand and knocked on the window. This little Muslim man came outside, and I introduced myself as English Defence League, and he was fascinated. He said how much he'd wanted to talk with somebody from there for ages, because we have got a few things mixed up. So we set a date to talk again. From then on, I think we had regular meetings every 2 weeks. It was just talking to somebody like myself, where I thought every Muslim was out to get me. It wasn't like that at all. Just a pocket of individuals who want to cause disharmony. The hardest thing for me was taking myself out of that bubble of hate and moving away from the negativity. For every negative story, there's 10 positives that you never see, because they don't sell papers. So I opened up a little bit and then realised that the people I once feared aren't that bad.
So his story is really interesting, and it's not different from what many similar stories are like, that they just have never met a Muslim, right? There's a study as well that, I don't know, a third or something, or quite a lot of, I think it's half or something of British people haven't met a Muslim. And that's the case, generally as well, that people who haven't themselves met or spoken to a Muslim, the only exposure they've had to a Muslim is through watching the news, or some other negative portrayal of Muslims, and because of that they harbor a lot of hate against Muslims, because that's all they've seen, and they genuinely think that Islam is out to get them, Muslims are evil, this and that. But until they meet them, or when they meet them, their perspective completely changes. And you see from his story, right, he realized that it's just, Muslims are just like us, right? And that's why, like, a big message is for us to go out and meet people and let them know who we really are, and the true and peaceful teachings of Islam, and that's that's our mission, and that's our responsibility as well. And the media, the way we utilize the media, right, is a big factor in how we can do that. Because it's not just getting on TV or on radio or getting an article published in the newspaper. There's also social media, even WhatsApp, and making other contacts and things like that, even in your local communities, that can go a long way into dispelling people's fear of Islam. And let me just go to the next slide. So there are certain terms used in the media about Muslims which are actually very, very problematic. And I mean, if you look at jihadists or jihadi, Islamist or terrorist, and if you just compare these two headlines, right, these are both terrorists, right? And one is, too risky to rescue jihadi baby, and the other one is angelic boy who grew into an evil far right mass killer. So basically, these are two headlines which are describing, the backgrounds of terrorists, and one is described as a jihadi baby, and one is described as an angelic boy, just because he's white. And even the terms Islamist, jihadist, I mean, the connotations there, like, you can just think about it. What are the meanings, the underlying assumptions there? Islamist, if someone does something violent or they're a terrorist, they're labeled Islamist. What does that mean? If you think about it, it means that they're following Islam, and this is what Islam teaches, right? Essentially, you can say we're Islamists because we follow the teachings of Islam. Even fundamentalists, right? We follow the fundamental teachings of Islam, right? But if someone does something violent, they label them as the fundamentalist and as the Islamist. So they're basically associating the words Islam to mean violence and and terrorism, basically. And then there's been loads of cases where Muslims Muslim extremists have been labeled as terrorists, while non-Muslim extremists have been labeled as gunmen or something else. But even the term moderate Muslim, that's problematic as well, right? You might not be able to, an average person may not see what the issue is there, but what's that saying is that that Islam in general is extreme. But here are people who are moderate Muslims, right? These are the people who are moderate. They're not like other Muslims who are all extremists. So it's kind of like putting them into categories, and this kind of subtle messaging here is also very, very problematic. And we'll see that more with, and then here's other MPs and commentators who've tweeted quite provocative and inflammatory things as well about Islam. Unapologetically, just completely anti-Muslim comments. And we'll see in this video how Fox News, which is well known for being quite right-wing, we'll see how they portray Muslims and Islam.
Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law, which in itself is antithetical to the United States Constitution?
So let's say there are 10,000 right-wing extremist terrorist acts every day. It still doesn't answer the question, why are people coming to this country in the name of Islam killing Americans? And don't you think you should pause for a minute and reflect on what's gone wrong within your community?
Do we remember who the bombers of the Boston Marathon were? I mean, just an aside to the Muslim community, if you don't want to be portrayed in a negative light, maybe don't burn people alive and set off bombs and things like that.
Now terrorism and the jihadists are again on the move. And most Muslim nations are not joining with the West to confront that. Therefore, criticism of Islam's role on the world stage is certainly valid. The Muslim world needs to take a hard look at itself.
Being accused of Islamophobia is actually worse than plotting a terror attack in some circles. Remember the reports that the neighbors of the San Bernardino attackers had seen some unusual activity. We don't know to the extent that they shared that information with authorities. It looks like they didn't.
Because they didn't want to be labeled racist.
We can't admit the problem, which is Islamism. The consequence, the fight's not engaged, it wages longer, more people die. The sooner we admit the problem, the sooner we can get help. Send everyone to Islamophobia Phobia Anonymous.
So you can see that they've made, a lot of assumptions there that, Islam as a religion and Muslims as a whole are to blame for the actions of certain extremists and terrorists. And they're making that assumption that, Muslims don't speak out against it. And also they're expecting all the Muslims to speak out against, something done by a few extremist Muslims. This is this is a big double standards, because that is not expected when a white person or a Christian terrorist or any other group, if they do something, then there's no such expectation of, you know, that entire group speaking out against it and condemning it and clarifying what their actual views are. And also, like things she said that, oh, Sharia law is against the constitution, things like that. Of course not, right? You know, Sharia is you know, how a person practices Islam, you know, in his personal life. And obviously, as we know, that, you know, loyalty and love of your country is part of faith. So all of these kind of comments and assumptions that they make, but it stems from, one, ignorance, and two, you know, a misunderstanding or not having exposure to actual Muslims and not knowing what they actually believe. So what can you do and what can we do? Because as Ahmadi Muslims and as followers of the Prophet Islam, who was Sultan al-Qalam, who was the prince of the pen, and whose whole, you know, one of his main and entire purpose of coming was to rejuvenate Islam and to prove it to be the superior teaching to all others. And also, you know, a lot of his works was responding to the attacks against Islam by Christian missionaries. It's our job in this day and age to also continue those efforts and that work. So what can we do? The main thing we can do is to pray, because there's a hadith that the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that, you know, in the latter days, you know, the Dajjal and, you know, the force of Gog and Magog, they will be so powerful that no earthly power will be able to contend with them. But what will happen is that the Messiah and his community will go to the mountain and they will pray, and through their prayers, Allah will bring a change about in the earth. So the main thing is to pray. And because, you know, Allah is the one who changes the hearts, but alongside prayer, obviously, we need to take action. And one thing you could do is letters to editors. You know, a lot of Ahmadis have been published, and editors always like to publish, you know, other views and different views from both sides and different angles and things. Also, you can use social media. A lot of Ahmadis, again, are on Twitter and responding to, you know, Islamophobia comments and things like that. And this is something, you know, anyone can do, right? Letter to editor, you have to send to editor, and it's up to them whether to publish or not. But on social media, you can respond straight away. And there's so many Jamaat teams. So there's, like, you know, the Review of Religions, there's our office in the press and media, there's Sultan al-Qalam, there's Rational Religion, there's Voice of Islam. There's so many teams you could join to be able to publish positive messages about Islam and to counter the negative messages. But also just be informed and know how the media is being used, or misused, I should say, to portray Islam in this way, and also be informed about how they do it, like the terminology that they use, you know, like jihadist, Islamist, and fundamentalist, which are quite problematic. And also, you know, read and watch the news and know what's going on, so that when the time comes to respond, you can respond. But also, like, a lot of the answers are already in our Jamaat books and videos and our literature. And if you watch Khalifa Rabi Rahimullah's speeches, lectures, and Q&As especially, there's, you know, pretty much all the answers. Even Hazur's books and Hazur's speeches these days, they're very, very tailored towards the Western world and all their fears about Islam, whether that's about democracy, immigration, about love of the country, and whether you can be a loyal Muslim and a loyal citizen of the country. Like Hazur's answered that question, you know, many, many times in his talks and lectures and things. So yeah, so like I was saying, you know, just even follow Hazur's example and see how he responds and how he gives interviews and things like that. And again, you know, Ahmadi publications, like you have Al-Hakam, you have Review of Religions, you have Rational Religion, you have all of these different avenues to try to respond. And so these are really good outlets for us to, you know, join in this cause of promoting the true teachings of Islam to the world and repelling the negative biases that people have. And if you look at the way the Holy Prophet ﷺ responded, like I said, there was propaganda in his time as well. He was called all sorts of things. There were rumors spread about him and about the Muslims. There was a lady who was like, there's a story about a lady who was, she was carrying heavy bags and she was leaving the town, and the Holy Prophet ﷺ, happened to pass by, and he said, oh lady, what's wrong? And she said, oh, I've heard of this man, his name is Muhammad, and he's a magician and he casts his spell on people and things like that. And so the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he stayed quiet and he offered to help with her bags, and he took her to her destination. And then the lady said, oh, at least tell me your name, you were so helpful. And then the Holy Prophet ﷺ told her that, I am Muhammad and I'm that man. And then she realized at that point that all of that propaganda and all of those rumors were completely untrue. And that just goes to show that in that time, it was pretty much the same thing. There was rumors and propaganda being spread and misinformation, but it was the actions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and of Muslims and their superior moral examples which turned people's hearts. And it's the same thing, today. Often when Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya goes and does charitable work or does homeless feeding or flood relief efforts, that almost just those things have a bigger impact than doing tabligh in the traditional way, because people are seeing physically how Muslims are responding and being charitable. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ, again, he always he always tried to forgive his enemies and try to return evil with kindness and try to show a superior moral example. And a lot of people, a lot of his enemies just converted and just accepted Islam just because of seeing his morals and just because he forgave them, right? There's an example of as Ikrama and many others, and also the Holy Quran says that bear with patience what they say, and just return evil with good, and that's the way to change hearts. So this was the example of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and we know the Holy Prophet ﷺ was extremely successful in turning enemies into friends, and so that is the example to follow. And going back to like the newspapers and the media, like they published something like this at the time of the Promised Messiah, Islam, right? This was an American newspaper, the Boston Herald, I believe it is. And this was like a full page spread where Hazrat Masih Maud al-Islam is, praised with this headline, Great is Mirza Ghulam Ahmad the Messiah. And, imagine, something like this. Imagine the Daily Mail, for example, publishing something like this. So I'm saying it is possible, and the media does sometimes do stuff like this. And if we make the efforts, which we do often, and try to reach out to the media and tell them about this stuff, then very often they do publish it as well. But we also have to remember, as Ahmadi Muslims, it's our responsibility. And why is it our responsibility? Because in the world, generally, there's confusion about what Islam is. It's very convoluted and it's very, very mixed up with different ideologies and things, and it's been politicized and it's used as a political tool often. And also Muslims, believe in a violent jihad, although there's a trend away from that now. But there is still that perception, but we're the ones who can counter that. Hazrat Masih Maud al-Islam was the one who came and said that this is not the time of the jihad with the sword, right? And jihad, the jihad that's needed today is with the pen, and also of your own personal struggle to make yourself a better person. And also we all give all our examples and our arguments from original Islamic sources, which is Quran and Hadith. And so we've got those messages and that means to be able to repel the negative biases about Islam. And so Ahmadis are doing it. So if you look at the last decade, we've been, Alhamdulillah, in all sorts of media, and we've managed to get the message out. And Ahmadis are writing articles, they're giving interviews, they're responding on social media, and they're using all the Jamaati platforms and avenues as well. and and the media often gives positive coverage as well, like you can see here. And this is when we do litter picking on New Year's Day. So almost all the time, it gets picked up by the news media. And like I said, Hazur's approach, you can see Hazur, he's very, very active as well in getting the message out in the media, and he's very keen for us to do so. He takes great interest in this because obviously this is the age where the message of Islam can be spread and is being spread through the media. And so through his letters, his speeches, through the guidance he gives, in virtual mulaqats, and through other interviews, and through personal meetings, he's spreading the true message. And often, if you see, his speeches when there's a mosque opening or something like that, when he speaks to externals, a lot of them have said that they come with some fear or some anxiety in their minds about Islam. But when Hazur speaks and he tells them about, for example, how Islam teaches Muslims to treat neighbors and things like that, their fear gets dispelled completely. So this is Hazur's approach, and as Ahmadi Muslims, it's our duty to join in this, this effort to show everyone the peaceful and true teachings of Islam. So that was just like a brief overview of how the media represents Islam, and a bit about why, and also what you can do. And that's all I have to say. And if there's any questions, then I'd be happy to take them.
Jazakallah, Atif Sahib, that was most comprehensive, and your experience over the years have come to bear. You can see, obviously, you've put in a lot of work into research, bringing some information from publications in the US and obviously in the UK here as well. I have one question. Do you believe that the decline of Christianity in the Western world has any impact on the hatred for Islam?
I mean, yes, that might be the case, because if you look at a lot of far-right nationalists, that's what they feel. They feel that their Christian values are being sidelined and Muslims are a threat. And also there's that historical rivalry between Islam and Christianity. So, I mean, that is a reason. But then again, like, religiosity generally is declining, and religion is deemed as something it's not deemed with a lot of seriousness, or is not given a lot of respect or seriousness. And but I don't think that's the only reason. I mean, I think that might be a factor, but I think there's just a general kind of perception against Muslims that this is what they believe and this is what they teach, and also that they are a threat to our way of life, right? Because obviously Islamic values, like when they see the parda, for example, right, they're very, very anti-parda, or whether it's certain views about the family unit or things like that, that could be deemed as a threat. But Christianity is declining, and that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity is declining, and a lot of people, they're against religion generally. So that might be a factor as well. But I think that's the only factor. I don't think it's a huge factor, because if Christianity and Islam used to be in conflict as well, Christian missionaries used to speak, like that pastor Terry Jones. But I think that can be a factor. But I think that's the only factor.
Jazakallah. There's a question from me. How do you think us Ahmadis could encourage other people of no faith or different faiths, to watch MTA?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, it's interesting because Hazur actually in the Majlis Shura, in the National Shura a few weeks ago, Hazur actually said that MTA is a big and good form of tabligh, and that a lot of people get introduced to Islam, the Jamaat, just by watching MTA, right? And some people end up joining the Jamaat just from MTA. But I think, one thing is for us at MTA, I'd say, is to try to tailor some of our programs for external audiences, perhaps, right? But also, we can, even Roundup is a children's program, and some children have, which is on MTA, and some children have told me that they show their friends at school that, I'm on this news program, which is Roundup for kids. So, right, so that people might end up watching MTA in that way. But, it just comes down to word of mouth and marketing and things like that, and just telling your colleagues and things. And yeah, if you can get your children on Roundup, then that's a good opportunity to tell the teachers and their friends as well. But yeah, I mean, what I was going to say on that, really, MTA is a good formative league, and there's so many other, it's online, there's an app, there's it's on YouTube live all the time. You can send a link to your friends and things. But I guess you could even it's how you pitch it to somebody who you want to watch MTA. You can tell them that it's the first Muslim first global 24-hour Muslim TV channel, right? And it has no adverts, right? So that might entice somebody to watch it. But yeah, it's how you pitch it as well, and maybe tell them of a specific program or something that they should watch, which might be of interest to them. Which it might be Faith Matters, right? And there's Faith Matters episodes on YouTube as well. And that because that'll have a lot of answers to common questions which non-Muslims might have. So I think that's a big way as well, of just sending clips and specific programs.
Jazakallah, Sahib. So that was our final question. May I thank you again for a very detailed disposition on this matter, obviously, which is very important for our current situation, especially in the West, for those of us practicing Muslims living here in the West. So may Allah bless you. May I request that you lead us in silent prayer before we bring the lecture to a close?
Jazakallah. Please join me in silent prayer. Ameen.
Jazakallah for joining us today. Inshallah, next Tuesday we'll be here again with our English lecture. And don't forget, we have our Urdu lectures held on Mondays. May Allah bless you all for your time. May Allah bless you again, Atif, for your efforts here. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.